I would be the first one to stand up and say, we have to do something about this, and these kids need to be protected instead of imprisoned.
John, were you on the Senate floor at this time?
I don't
told
know
him this?
just where I said it, but it got in all the papers. And the next thing I knew, I got a letter from one young boy, about 17, 18, and had been grabbed right after Larry King was arrested, or after they had this raid on the credit union. And this kid wrote me a letter from the Douglas County, which is Omaha, jail. And he said, well, if you'd come talk to me, I could tell you some things, and then you would believe, and you'd have different thoughts, and I could prove it to you. Well, I thought, what the heck, called his bluff. So I went to see the kid, a young man named Paul Bonassi.
Right.
And he started providing me information. I started checking things out, and one thing after another that he told me that I could actually validate, he was right on. And then he told me about one particular party he had been at. They'd have these parties, and then they'd have after parties where the kids would be arranged to satisfy the sick desires of this or that particular politician or whatever, even though the politician didn't know he was being filmed and compromised. But anyway, he said, well, I was at this one party in Texas, you know. He said, at the Republican convention. Well, now I perked up my ears because I had been the #1 vote-getting delegate in the state of Nebraska, pledged to, what was it, Reagan in one case and Bush or whoever in another. Anyway, and attended, of course, those national conventions. And Larry King, the man we're talking about, was the one who opened both the 1984 and the 1988 Republican National Convention, singing the national anthem, and then he gave what had to be the biggest, most expensive party I've ever been at or participated in, and a place called South Fork Ranch, which is where they filmed the TV series Dallas, if anybody remembers that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Anyway, and we had one incredible party there, and I was there because, as I say, I was delegate pledged to the Republican candidates, and was at those conventions, and so I knew about the party, and I thought, well, now I know something that I can really check out on because I was there. I remembered very well, you know, the one at South Fork Ranch, which, as I say, was without question the most expensive party ever I'd been to, and Larry King paid for that and sponsored it. And so the kid starts telling me about him being there and being with this or that, and he named several politicians and other kids who he claimed were there. But what he described, you would have had to been there personally to know. For example, Larry King was wandering around most of the night with Maureen Reagan. You know, remember Maureen Reagan?
Oh, yeah.
I guess she died not too long ago.
Yep.
But anyway,
Cancer.
Maureen Reagan was the president's daughter, you know, remember? And she was draped all over Larry King all the time, kind of like a big old blanket. And just one thing after another, the kid was right on. So as I say, I started checking things out. And literally, the kid had called my bluff. But the final piece was, the state had hired this psychiatrist, the head of the Psychiatric Institute of, I don't remember, one of the big universities, to come and examine the kid. So I go and I talk to the psychiatrist, and I says, is he completely nuts? He says, no, he's not nuts. He says, he's a multiple personality. And I said, well, so then what? He's lying. And he said, no, multiple personalities don't lie. They don't have to lie. They simply switch personalities.
Right.
And he says, I'm satisfied, you know, that the kid is a very clear-cut multiple personality, and that he's telling the truth. At least the truth is he knows it and sees it and believes it and experienced it. He said, but of course, like anything, I'd like to see more investigation done to validate or prove or verify this or that. And he said, but yeah, I believe him. And as I say, so I agreed then, based upon what everybody kind of calling my bluff, you know, because I was the one that stood up and said if I believed any of this, I'd be the first one to defend the kids. So that's precisely and exactly what I did. I agreed to represent the boy for nothing, and to make a long story short, we were pretty successful eventually. I kept him out of out of being convicted. They dropped all charges against him, even though they locked away the other kids, a lot of them that had testified. But one of the interesting things that came out of it was in the lawsuit I filed, where I won $1 million judgment against Larry King on behalf of this boy Benassi. The number one defendant in the case, and this is going to rock you and shock you, the number one defendant in the case was, I named the Catholic Archdiocese of Omaha and certain priests out of Boys Town. Boys Town, you may know, is probably the world's most famous institution to take care of homeless boys. And believe it or not, I actually was in Boys Town for a while, and it literally is one of the greatest institutions that God ever allowed to exist. But like anything, there can be some elements of corruption. And in this particular case, it was very clear to me that there had been some, and my lawsuit against the Catholic Archdiocese, the Catholic Church, was the first in the United States, I repeat, was the first in the United States that actually identified this problem of priests having pedophilia problems with some of their young boys particularly. And
how far back was that, John?
Pardon?
When did this take place?
This was in the early 1990s when I first filed the lawsuit.
Okay.
But here's the interesting part. The judge immediately, almost, dismissed the Catholic Archdiocese and the Catholic Church out of the lawsuit with the admonition to me, even though they were the number one named defendant in the suit, that this is the most outrageous lawsuit he'd ever heard or seen, daring to accuse these people and blah, blah, blah. So they filed a motion. They got dismissed out.
Was that Judge Urbaum, John?
Yep.
Jeez.
But here's the rest of the story, which easily, as I say, only becomes interesting and shocking because of the last couple months.
Yeah.
So I got angry, and I went to Rome and tried to set up a meeting with the Pope so I could bring the problem directly to him. Pope Paul, right?
Yep.
Early 1990s.
Right.
But I could only get in with the general audience, you know, where you get 50 or 100 people in the room. And so then I got put or referred instead for a personal meeting with another cardinal who was supposedly Pope John's number one assistant or whatever. And Cardinal, I met with him, and his name was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes. I
Wow.
said it gets interesting. So anyway, and I told about this at the time when I thought I had it in the book, but I only have part of it there. But anyway, so I meet with Cardinal Ratzinger, and to my surprise and shock, he didn't try to defend or deny. He said, yes, we know all about this problem. We know all about this problem. It's been getting worse, and he says the American Church will not listen, will not deal with Rome on this problem. They say they'll take care of it themselves, that we don't understand in Rome, or we cardinals don't understand that the American Church is not the same in handling these matters as maybe they might do, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he said, so yes, we know about it, and he applauded and congratulated me for filing the lawsuit. I thought he'd, you know... So anyway, then I'm, 10, 15 years later, or 10 or 12 years later now, I'm watching on TV, and the next thing I know, white smoke has come puffing out, and they come and announce, you know, we have a pope, and then they name him as Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. Anyway, so, been interesting, some of the developments that have occurred since I wrote the original book. But to answer your question, which I now have spent 20 minutes going around.
Yeah.
Typical attorney.
Yeah, right.
When I'm questioning this young boy Benassi, as I'm trying to get information to use to represent him,
Right.
one of the things he tells me that he participated in would be these, and I don't remember the exact term, I think I wrote it in the book, but anyway, he participated in these trips where he would go, he was about 12, 13, 14 at the time, he would go to this or that place and be used as bait, you know, he'd be out there and